This is the second graffiti lecture, and I'm going to be titling this lecture Graffiti Number 2. We are now going to be looking at a case study that's very specific to my research and also what I have found as a prevailing theme within the graffiti, from one building at Tikal called Mahler's Palace. The image before you is a stucco wall inside of Mahler's Palace. It is also known as 5D65. And what you see is a name that has been incised into the white stucco, Teoberto Mahler, 1890 to 1894. And then sort of the swirl. And this is essentially the signature of Teoberto Mahler, Teobert Mahler, a German scholar and adventurer from the late 19th century. And he just put his mark on this wall. He tagged it. So I wanted to begin this lecture by showing you that graffiti and tagging and scratching on the walls and marking, this is something that as human beings we do. We like to do it. We are drawn to do it. We find it fun. Not all of us do it. Not every single one of us does it. But this is a form of expression that is a universal throughout human existence. And it's been going on since the very beginning of time. One of the characteristics of graffiti, besides its universality, is the fact that it is quote-unquote naughty. There is an exciting factor to it that gives us a sense of thrill, a little bit of an adrenaline rush, perhaps, and a sense of doing something that is changing an environment. You are changing an architectural environment when you tag something. And that is not the original intention of that environment. That environment is a wall. That wall is to enclose a space. It is not to be a substrate or a palette for someone's artwork / graffiti, unless that is specified. But graffiti is inherently done in a subversive way. If you are going to be doing a mural on the wall, that is not subversive, although some murals are subversive. Some murals state a theme or a message that is anti-establishment, and that can be very good too. But they may share a subversive message, but the idea of subversion is twofold in graffiti. It is a subversive act, and often the message is subversive. Whereas with murals, that is not a subversive act, although the message might be subversive. So I wanted you to see that graffiti is universal. Mahler did it, we do it, the ancient Maya did it, and people before the ancient Maya were also scratching on the walls. I want to return to the major themes that we are going to be examining in this particular lecture, Graffiti 2, and they tie into the end themes of this class, which would be images of the ruler, painted manuscripts and murals, the idea of handheld objects, and lastly, the incorporation of architectural sculpture in the built environment of ancient Mesoamerican cultures. This is a case study that is illustrating these themes at the site of Tikal. And within this case study, we are going to be specifically looking at room 9 from Mahler's Palace and looking at a set of motifs. In my previous lecture, I gave you an example of what a motif was. It is essentially a visual language. It's a visual text that is broadly understood by a group of people. And the example that I gave you in my previous lecture, Graffiti 1, is Santa Claus. When you see a portly individual with white hair and beard wearing a red suit and who looks jolly, we as Americans And as people from the Western world, we look at him as Santa. Santa is also a character that is recognized in Asia also. So Santa has become this motif or this visual theme that is in many ways, not entirely, but in many ways global. So that is the idea of a motif. Another term that we will use in this lecture would be trope, T-R-O-P-E, and that is also borrowed from literature. A trope is a recognized theme or manner of describing or manner of writing that becomes its own independent concept. Santa is a trope for Christmas, for the season of Christmas. You don't necessarily see a lot of images of Santa in August, but you start to see images of Santa at Christmas time. So if we look at the ruler and the protector theme, which is going to be our case study for this lecture, this is a trope of rulership. This is a trope that is an aspect of divine kingship among the Maya. It's a popular idea, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the meaning of the ruler and the protector theme as we know it right now in the year 2016. I'm giving you that caveat because, as you know, scholarship is liquid. It moves. And when we are interpreting ancient art, we need to be aware that our interpretations may change and may be proven not incorrect, but may be proven as not point on. With that, we're going to move forward. We are still looking at Theobert Mahler. This is a representation of Theobert Mahler's drawing of the graffiti from Mahler's palace. In this example, it's from room 8 in Mahler's palace. So Theobert Mahler, if you recall from our other lecture, he lived at Mahler's palace. And so he was looking at the graffiti in all of the rooms. And the prevailing theme of the graffiti from Mahler's palace was this ruler and the protector theme. And so we have a representation that he drew of the ruler and protector theme from room 8, the west wall. And you see this feline figure, who is this over life scale figure of the ruler. Then you've got the ruler seated on this X throne, and then you had that kind of perhaps elaborate head that is attached to the back of the protector theme. So he drew it, and he was fascinated by this trope, and he was interested in reproducing it for his own study. And this is published in one of his books, and he, you can tell that this was an image, a trope, or a motif that was attractive and recognizable to Mahler. The most important feature of that last sentence is the idea of recognizable. Here we are back at Temple 1 in the central sort of ceremonial precinct of Tikal. It is called the Central Plaza, where this building is located, and directly in front of Temple 1 is Temple 2. We looked at some of the graffiti from Temple 2, and I want to recall to you the carved lintel imagery from the interior of Temple 1, from the superstructure of Temple 1. And this interior carved imagery gives us sort of a very canonical, elaborate, and official representation of this ruler and protector theme. The ruler is seated on a throne. The protector is looming behind him, and this protector is considered a supernatural figure. And the ruler is considered both a human and a person who is imbued with supernatural powers. These supernatural powers that are given to the ruler may be due to his dynastic lineage, due to his relationship to the supernatural vis-a-vis this jaguar figure, and also perhaps due to the gifts that he has been given by various entities in the spiritual realm that provide him with the power to become the ruler. So this leads us to this idea of divine kingship, which is, in my opinion, not really clearly defined in the Maya world. Neither is it really defined in the Western world. We all know of Louis XIV as the Sun King, as a divine king. And perhaps we could re-examine what it means to be divine. But one of the most simplistic ways of describing it is that he has been given political power through a sacred entity. In the case of Louis XIV, he was given political power through his relationship with the Catholic Church, and his word was law. And we believe that we see something similar to this among the ancient Maya, because the ancient Maya are depicted in their official portraiture of their kings as being surrounded by accoutrement of supernatural beings, meaning objects representing supernatural beings. And they are also depicted in a way that they are larger than other figures. They are wearing more elaborate clothing than other figures. They're wearing clothing that encrusts their body and changes their bodies to become a figurehead, almost a representation of their position. They are no longer Joe, but they are the king. And this sort of transformation of human to entity as a ruler or a political ruler is a very interesting transformation. January 20th of 2017, we will see the transformation of power in our own country, where Donald Trump will no longer just be Donald Trump, he will be called Mr. President. And that changes his status quite a bit. You saw that with Barack Obama. He's no longer Barry Obama, he is now Mr. President. And that's an extraordinary change. And that is what we also see here, is we see images of the ruler surrounded by the accoutrement of his position. Does his position own him, or does he own the position? And what is the role of his dynastic lineage? Because these were not democratically elected rulers. These were rulers who took on their position of power through their family. And that is a very different way of looking at politics than we do in the Western American political system. We have dynastic families, but we do not have this schedule of dynastic succession. So be aware of that. That changes the way a family relates to one another, the way elites relate to each other, and the way a political system is depicted. Another breakdown of the image of the ruler and protector from lintel 3 inside of the superstructure of Temple 1. You have the ruler in the yellow circle, and then you have the very dynamic face of the jaguar figure in the upper yellow circle. And in the blue squares, you see the structure, the temporary ceremonial architectural structure. I wanted to also show you the context of the lintel. This is a photograph of the actual carved lintel from superstructure in Temple 1. And you see this deep carving. This is bas relief, which means low relief, but it is deeply cut, low relief. I want to remind you that this particular sculpture was read with your head cocked at a very odd angle and looking straight up. You were looking at this sculptural program with a torch or a burning stick, and it gives you both raking and intense light but then broadly it gives you shadowy, dappled light. So our ability to read this image is going to be affected by the illumination. I say this illumination is a big issue because these are very small rooms and they're very dark. There are no windows except for the central doorway. I'm giving you a depiction of, this is a representation of the ruler and protector theme from the graffiti in room 9. And the caption says 4 examples. And we are looking at basically 3 examples, but there might be a 4th example. I don't really profile that with the yellow arrow, and I will talk to you about this possible 4th example. But I wanted to remind you that when I initially talked about graffiti in my lecture, graffiti is interpretive. Graffiti is looking at lived experience reproduced on a wall. Graffiti is very expressive, and the typical rules of depiction in terms of space, scale, costume, and canonical representation don't always apply. However, I am going to contradict myself later in this lecture. So see if you can catch my contradiction. We have, in the ways of looking at graffiti from a scholarly point of view, we have something called a clustering of graffiti. And a clustering of graffiti means that there is a whole bunch of different examples of graffiti placed together and loosely aligned to each other through form. This is located on the south wall of room 9, and you can see that we have 3 very explicit representations of the ruler and protector theme, and you can tell it right away because you have this out-of-life scale person, and then you have a small scale person. They are seated or associated with a platform, a temporary scaffold or litter platform. They are standing and looking in the same direction, and in general their arms are placed over some kind of a railing or other architectural feature. The first image I want to talk to you about in terms of this cluster shows this motif, and this is going to be on your left side. It is a litter. It appears to be a litter, and people are carrying it. You see these 2 small figures that look like they're lifting this big palanquin or litter. Those are 2 words that mean the same thing. And you have a small ruler, and it appears as though his headdress has just engulfed his entire body. He is seated on a throne with an X denoting it, and he has a little cane or support system that he holds. In contrast, the protector figure is looming large above him and also looks in the same direction. This particular protector figure is humanoid. He looks anthropomorphized and more on the anthro side. He looks like a human, although he looks as though he has sort of supernatural attributes. Mostly his size. He's way over life size. However, you might also consider the size of the king. What does the king look like to you? Does he have the same stature, proportion, and detail that we've seen with the lintel imagery of the king? And if we were really to kind of strip away all of the elegant regalia of the structural form of the lintel image and just look at proportions, we would see that the proportions between the ruler and the protector in the graffiti are vastly different than the proportions of the ruler and the protector in the lintel image. In this example, the ruler is quite a bit smaller than the protector, almost exaggerated in his diminutive size. Let us look to the center image of the ruler and protector. This theme has many of the same features as that we just saw. The graduated stepped platform, this temporary litter or palanquin, and we also have our protector. In this example, he is looking more feline-like. He also could be almost in the representation of a person wearing a feline costume, wearing a feline outfit, a headdress, or a mask. So this could be a supernatural figure, or this could be a person who is adorned like a feline, adorned like the water lily jaguar. Also, you have a square box at the feet of this feline figure and a partial representation of the ruler. The ruler's partial representation may be due to damage of the line. It also just may be due to the lack of really deeply incised linear skill or imagery that this person applied. But we are definitely looking, if we're going to be very generous, we are looking at the very least, an extraordinarily sketchy version of this ruler figure. However, the proportionality between the ruler figure and this feline protector, it almost remains the same with the earlier version that we saw, where it is an exaggerated, diminutive scale of the king. The third image that I wanted to discuss would be a very humanoid or human-like representation of the protector theme. He is standing, gazing out, holding onto a railing, and in probably a less elaborate palanquin or litter. And here we have an interesting depiction of the ruler. He is not seated on the throne. So the throne is clearly denoted with the X sign. You see that, and that is something that was important to this artist. So they kept the X sign consistent, although you don't see it in that center representation. But the ruler appears to be A, missing, or B, has stepped down off the litter. And you can see this small diminutive individual stepping off the litter. So it kind of is disconcerting if we are looking at this from the point of view of an ancient Maya individual. And we are telescoping back in time to the 750s, and we're thinking, here you are depicting the divine ruler. His word is law. His word is truth. Yet we see this very, very exaggeratedly small individual. And in the third representation, he's actually not even on his throne. He's stepping off of the throne. And if you understand depictions of rule, the idea of being in a formal seated position or a formal standing position surrounded by all of the accoutrement of your office is very important. It is also an example that I could use is if you were to see President Barack Obama give a speech at a podium that did not have the Great Seal of the United States of America on it, that would be disconcerting to us because he is the President of the United States, and that Great Seal goes with him wherever he goes. And secondarily, if an individual is speaking at the very same podium as Barack Obama, that Great Seal is removed. So be aware that the accoutrement of the office is very important. And I think it's telling that you see a depiction of the ruler stepping off of this litter and essentially leaving his throne empty. The very last image, which could be a depiction of the ruler protector theme or not, shows us a nice example of the architectural context in which we are looking at this ceremony. And it is a palanquin or a temporary structure. You can see that it has these poles that continue down through this sort of baseline foundation underneath the structure, and it kind of gives us a sense of the activities of this ceremony. This clustering may depict various scenes within one ceremony. It may depict the same ceremony with various actors who are playing the role of protector and ruler. We don't know, but we are looking at multiple images of the same trope. And these images are showing a very different interpretation of this trope. I wanted to remind you of the overall context. Theobald Mahler graffitied his name in the doorway of the central door of Mahler's palace. The room where we are spending our time looking at this graffiti is on your far right, and that is room 9. These 3 rooms, room 1, room 3, and room 9, face court 2. So these are quasi-public spaces. So how do you think these individuals who may have occupied this space or worked in this space or spent time in this space, how did they get the opportunity to create these subversive or possibly subversive images on the wall? How did this happen? One of the things that we have seen in the archaeology and the archaeological investigations of these buildings is that we have seen that they may have decorated the interiors, or probably did decorate their interiors, with very beautiful woven fabrics and mantles and blankets. And that gives us an indication that not always were these scenes visible. In addition, because these rooms had access to light, the incised imagery may have been bleached out by light streaming in from the doorways. But the light may have worked to help illuminate the shadows associated with the incised images to make them more visible, because there are examples of graffiti from room 9 that are in quasi-shadow, and that makes these incised images, it really helps to enhance their visibility. So I want you to think about how they may have been used, how they were viewed, and why would someone create these subversive images on the walls. Again, I wanted to fill in some questions that you might have about this context. The Central Acropolis is a series of courtyards with associated structures. They all had a similar architectural style, which is called the range type architecture, which is very horizontal. It almost can be compared to a ranch style house where it's just one level and open and wide ranging rooms. Although the Mahler's palace is unique in that it has 2 stories. But you can see the general location of the Central Acropolis is in very close proximity to the Great Plaza and to Temple 1. And I want to remind you, what piece of sculpture is inside of Temple 1 that we've been looking at? Can you name it? It is lintel 3 from the superstructure of Temple 1. So we're looking at 2 very different architectural programs, but one is residential or a sanctuary for elites. The other one is a sanctuary for elites who are deceased. But it is also a sanctuary for elites who are alive, because the ruler's son may have visited his image inside of the superstructure that reveals this very elegant reproduction of the ruler and the protector theme. Here we have these side-by-side comparisons, and I want you to think about how the graffiti has altered the trope of the ruler and protector theme without altering the basic structure of the ruler and protector theme, so that we understand that this is the trope that we are looking at, but very subtle differences have been made so that the meaning of this trope may have been changed. Another depiction from room 9 of the trope, where you have this extensive headdress that overpowers this very diminutive king, and then this very extensive large figure of the protector. Compare that to what you see with lintel 3. Compare the basic proportions of the ruler and the protector from lintel 3. The last slide that I wanted to show you is kind of bringing us to the very beginning of this lecture, which is the idea of the universality of graffiti and of scratching on the walls or putting your handprint on the wall. This is an expression that is very human, and it is natural. A lot of people think it's illegal and destructive, and that's really not the purpose of this lecture. We're looking at ancient graffiti, but I also want you to think about the nature of graffiti. Graffiti is naturally subversive. As I said, the act is subversive and the messages are usually subversive. Whereas with mural painting, the act itself is recognized as a positive act, although sometimes the messages can be quite subversive in a mural painting. And with this short case study lecture, I want you to think about the ruler and protector theme and how elites changed it when they put it on the wall of their homes or their sanctuaries, how they may have viewed this theme, and how may it have functioned. Because ancient art history does not give you the answers. We're giving you some evidence, and you need to come up with some interpretations yourself. Lastly, this is a very famous graffiti image from Banksy. You may know who he is. He is an anonymous British graffiti or wall artist, street artist, and it shows you the continuity between graffiti art today and graffiti art in the ancient world. Here you have representations of graffiti from the great caves of Western Europe, specifically in France, where these are paintings in a cave that are between 20 and 15,000 years old. Thank you.